When this conference on rethinking difference was the seed of an idea, one of the people we had in mind to join us in the conversation was Marisol de la Cadena. She's here, and we're delighted to have her with us as keynote speaker. Marisol de la Cadena is Professor of Anthropology at the University of California, Davis. Throughout her work, she has explored in intricate detail the complex histories of ethnic categories used in Latin America to negotiate difference. Marisol's first book, Indigenous Mestizos, The Politics of Race and Culture in Cusco, Peru, 1910 to 1991, published by Duke University Press in 2000, explores race relations in the Andes, both from an ethnographic and historical perspective. Marisol's recent work on earth beings and their place in the modern world has given rise to a number of significant publications, including the article Indigenous Cosmopolitics in the Andes, Conceptual Reflections Beyond Politics, published in Cultural Anthropology in 2010. The book Earth Beings, Ecologies of Practice Across Andean Worlds, by Duke University Press in 2015, is based on conversations with two Quechua-speaking indigenous leaders from Cusco. I believe that Marisol's work is special because in order to combat discrimination and racism, which are deeply rooted in many post-colonial Latin American and Caribbean countries, we need to understand where it comes from. To decide where to go next, we need to understand where we have already been. Thank you for agreeing to join us, Marisol, and to everyone here in the room for joining us too. The title of the keynote we are about to hear is Uncommoning Nature. Let's give a friendly, joyful welcome to Marisol de la Cadena.
Thanks very much. I feel honored with the invitation. Thanks, Rosalind. Thanks, Sarah. And thanks, Antonia, for having me here. It's really a pleasure and a responsibility to talk to you today. And I hope you'll enjoy what I have to say. It's a little bit dense. I cannot help it. I think that going to be a star requires work, and I'm not too agile at doing that without being dense yet. Hopefully I'll get there at some point. I've changed a little bit the title of the presentation. I added stories from the anthroponaut scene, or sharing interests in common that are not the same interest. And I usually say that I think this presentation and others in the company of some philosophers of science, in this case, big figure in my thought is Isabel Stengers, but big philosophers and makers of life, and in this case, my two big makers of life are Mariano Turpo, who continues to be with me whenever I think, because he did shake my way of thinking. I think in a dramatic way. And currently, Maxima Acuña, who some of you might have heard of. She's a woman who's defending a small parcel of land in northern Peru from one of the largest gold mines in the world, actually. One of the characteristics of my work, we're talking about Eduardo's and Viveiros de Castro's work to provoke politics. I think I share that with Eduardo. I always situate my work within the reach of my political friends who are also activists, from grassroots to Congress representatives in Peru. So when I write, I have them in mind and try to make them think. in a different way. So on June 5, 2009, at dawn and near the northern Amazonian town of Bawa, a violent confrontation took place between police forces and a large group of Peruvian citizens self-identified as belonging to the Awajún Wampis indigenous group. Explaining this event, the narrative that circulates in the media goes, give or take, as follows. As part of a general strike which started on April 9, 2009, and was organized by several Amazonian indigenous groups, the Awajún Wampis had taken control of a highway in northern Peru at a place called La Curva del Diablo, the Devil's Curve. They were protesting several decrees with which the government considered their territory to corporate oil exploration without abiding by the ILO Agreement 169. This international legislation, to which the Peruvian government has officially adhered, requires signatory states to consult the consent of inhabitants of territories that corporations may request for exploration and exploitation. Not having consulted with them, the concession was illegal, the protesters said. The police's objective was to break up the highway blockade. Given unknown circumstances, which are still under investigation, the confrontation got out of control. According to official count, the clash, known as El Baguazo, and I have here my translation into English, but I think this audience doesn't need the translation into English. Known as El Baguazo yielded more than 30 deaths between Awajún Wampis and policemen. The state ordered the arrest of some indigenous leaders. Those still in prison face 33 counts of death. Among those arrested was Santiago Manuel Valera, the most public Awajún Wampis individual. The quote below his picture is part of his testimony during the trial in April 10, 2014, 5 years after the event. He may face life in prison, but he was liberated not long ago, right? Yes. I'll read the quote. We will never accept that the government does what it wants with the territory that our ancestors assigned us before the Peruvian state was formed. Peru and the whole world should know that this place of 30,000 kilometers is ours and belongs to us. We will always defend it and will give our lives for it. We, Awajún Wampis, were defending our right, our identity, our culture, and development of our own, our forests, our rivers, our cosmos, and our territory. Santiago Manuel ended the statement declaring his innocence. The criminal trial against Manuel and others may be interpreted as a conflict over sovereignty, and depending on where we stand, we can debate for the right of Awajún Wampis to defend their territory or side with the state's prerogative to decide over national territory and the use of natural resources. Taken to the court, this would already be a challenging legal problem. However, I intend to argue that at the inception of this problem is a disagreement that would not find resolution within the rule of law, even in its fairest version. For the disagreement exists the existing domain of the rule of law. Explaining the confrontation in the midst of the strike, a young Awajún Wampis leader named Lenny, his face painted in red and black, a bandana around his head, spoke these words. We speak of our brothers who quench our thirst, who bathe us, those who protect our needs. This brother is what we call the river. We do not use the river for a sewage. A brother cannot stab another brother. We do not stop our brothers. If the transnational corporations would care about our soil like we have cared for it for millennia, we would gladly give them room so that they could work here. But all they care is their economic benefits to fill their coffers with wealth. With Lenny's words, I want to suggest that in the previous statement, the one that Manuel made, territory, as pronounced by him, made reference to both a piece of land under the jurisdiction of the Peruvian state and to an entity that emerges through the practices of life that our home One Piece may, for example, that would make for our home One Piece, that emerges through the practices of life of our home One Piece that may, for example, make people relatives of rivers, as in Lenny's statement. And kinship between people and water and forest may transform territory into our home One Piece, as in a recent public declaration by the leaders who said, territory is the our home One Piece. This relation, where people and territory are together, people, territory, territory, people, exceeds the possibility of modern humans and modern nature, as well as modern relations between humans and nature, without precluding these relations. It also complicates the conflict between the state and the Oahu One Piece, rather than the abuse of power that can be unmade, even with difficulty. The conflict becomes a misunderstanding impossible to solve without engaging in the terms that make territory other to the state's ability to understand, and therefore to its recognition. Erupting publicly, the conflict poses a challenge intolerable to the state, and its response might be the eradication of its roots, the denial of the Oahu One Piece terms to exist. To conceptualize this confrontation, I draw on Jacques Rancière and Eduardo Viveiros de Castro to say that it is a confrontation housing a historical disagreement, that is Rancière's term, about an equivocation, that is Viveiros de Castro's term, over what territory is and the relations that make it. Eduardo Viveiros de Castro is a Brazilian anthropologist. You know him. Equivocation is his concept, and you know the concept, I'm just going to refresh our minds, is his concept to explain the mode of communication among Amerindian inhabitants, humans and not, in the Brazilian Amazon. Equivocation, he says, houses the referential alterity between homonymic concepts with which entities that populate Amerindian worlds communicate or translate among each other. Crucial to the concept is, first, that these entities, which we would regard as humans or animals, consider themselves human and see their others as animals. And second, that what is results from the entity's point of view, which in turn results from their body. Communication and even preserving one's life consists in controlling their equivocation, or understanding that while the concept and therefore the understanding of the thing it refers to may be shared, the thing itself may emerge as different if the concept is uttered by an other to the self in the interlocution. When equivocation is the mode of communication, concepts and things are partially connected only. The same word may refer to two different things depending on the world it is uttered from. In the case that concerns me here, territory may be both the piece of land that rests separate from the humans and the state that may have the right to it, and it may also be the entity that is with the Oahu One Piece. What territory is will depend on the world that pronounces it, the relations that emerge from it. This agreement may have the appearance of an equivocation. Rancière, a philosopher of politics and aesthetics, conceptualizes this agreement as the conflict between one who says white and another who also says white but does not understand the same thing by it. In that sense, it's sort of similar to equivocation. Yet, while equivocation assumes that all participants in the interlocution are speakers, the misunderstanding that provokes disagreement à la Rancière results from a contention over what speaking means. It is both a dispute over the object of the discussion and over the capacity of those who are making an object of it. Moreover, as a political interruption to alter the conventional order and establish equality, disagreement is a dispute that confronts those who have speech with those who do not have or are denied speech. It is disagreement, à la Rancière, is a dispute about the conventions that distribute capacities to define how things are in a shared world. Struggles for civil rights in the Americas are an example of the disagreement, the eruption of politics in a state of police that changes the conditions of being, or the relations, conditions of being is a little bit too much, the relations among US whites and African Americans. Thus, the difference between both fellow concepts. Equivocation is a relation of misunderstanding between equals that are mutually other. The misunderstanding is ontological, and when it can be controlled, it is also an inevitable relational condition that cannot be changed. Instead, disagreement pits unequals in a dispute to be the same, and thus to name and define what the same would be. Here, the misunderstanding reflects an epistemic dispute to change how the established order is perceived. Said differently, and perhaps more clearly in terms of the argument of this paper, conceptualized through equivocation, the misunderstanding is because the concept houses entities as they are in worlds that are not the same world, or not only the same world. Instead, disagreement conceptualizes misunderstandings as emerging from a dispute about the distribution of conditions enabling individuals to name entities existing in a shared world. Thinking through Rancière's notion of disagreement, el bahuazo can be rendered as the eruption of politics, a historical event in which a subject emerges that disrupts the distribution of speech and the order it creates. In the specific case of el bahuazo, the disagreement that the Awahun Wampis manifested would have interrupted the distribution of the speech that assigns the state sovereignty to decide over territory. Against it, the Awahun Wampis would have claimed their own sovereign voice. Understood as an extension of the country over which humans have the power of decision, the entity territory remains the same, and what and how it is would not be in dispute. What is in dispute is who decides over that entity. But what that entity is not in dispute. That is through disagreement à la Rancière. Instead, what I want to do now is to try and talk Rancière and Viveiros de Castro into one, and I'm going to tweak both of them a little bit. So instead, conceptualized as a disagreement that houses an equivocation, the conflict can also be interpreted, and I emphasize also, the conflict can also be interpreted as a dispute around an entity, territory that is not the same and cannot be different, I'm going to repeat because this sentence is important. Instead, conceptualized as a disagreement that houses an equivocation, the conflict can also be interpreted as a dispute around an entity, territory, that is not the same, and cannot be the different things that it may emerge as in interlocutions between Awahun Wampis and the state. So what I'm saying is, if we think about the conflict, this conflict, in terms of both equivocation and disagreement, we have that the territory is Awahun Wampis, and that piece of land over which Awahun Wampis or the state have the right to decide. However, but what the conflict is about is that these two things that territory is cannot be two things. And that's why I say that this is a conflict that exceeds the rule of law, because the rule of law is who has the right to decide over territory, being one thing. Thinking through territory as a provocation, Santiago Manuel's statements and the trial from where they emerge would also reflect a disagreement, the nature of which is ontological. Thus, the equivocation would also be a political dispute aggravated by the condition of its impossibility, for neither the state nor the law are able, let alone equipped, to recognize the equivocation or the political dispute about it. It gets a little bit more complicated here. And fun too. I am calling this condition the anthroponaut scene. I conceptualize it as a world-making process through which heterogeneous worlds that do not make themselves through the ontological practices that separate between humans or culture and non-humans or nature, nor necessarily conceive as such the different entities in their assemblages, are both obliged into the distinction and exceed that distinction, and the obligation to be in that distinction. The anthroponaut scene would thus be both the will that obliges the distinction and destroys what disobeys the obligation, and the excesses to that will. The Anthropocene has become popularly as a scholarly reference to the era when humans have become a geological force capable of planetary destruction. The Anthroponaut scene makes obvious reference to the term, and the suffix is intended as a pun to its counterpart, scene. However, the not seen does not mainly refer to a regime of visibility. Rather, it mostly wants to make reference to what is within a historically formulated hegemonic condition of impossibility, and hence, composing the Anthropocene are antagonistic partners and their antagonistic relationship. On the one hand, the Anthroponaut scene comprises the practices and practitioners of the will that granted itself the power to eradicate all that disobeyed mandates to be human as modernity in its early and late versions sanctioned. On the other, it includes the disobedient practitioners or collectives composed with entities recalcitrant to classification as either human or non-human. As organized process of destruction, sometimes through benevolently offered assimilation, the Anthroponaut scene as relation was and sometimes continues to be a silent war waged against entities and world-making practices that ignore the separation of entities into nature and culture. So what I'm saying is two things here. What I'm saying is, obviously it is a pun to the Anthropocene, and I'm talking about the Anthropo that is not seen, but that not seen is not only referring to a regime of visibility. The Anthroponaut scene is that process through which those that exceeded divisions into nature and culture, or did not abide by divisions into nature and culture, were obliged into that division and exceeded that division. And what I'm also saying is that the Anthropocene is the antagonistic relationship between these two, between those who exceeded and those that obliged. And what I'm also saying is that this antagonistic relationship has oftentimes been a war between the excess and the obligation, or the practices that exceed and the practices that oblige. Dating from the earliest 16th century in what became the Americas, the war between these two different practices, the excess and the imposition, was loud and clear. Fighting for their God, Christian clerics walked the Andes from Colombia to Argentina and Chile, extirpating idolatries, a political practice that the friars conceived against devil-induced worship. Extirpation required dividing the participating entities into God-made nature, mountains, rivers, forests, and naturales, or incipient humans yet with a soul to be saved. The invention of modern politics secularized the antagonism. The war against recalcitrance to distinguish nature from humanity was silenced, yet it continued in the name of progress and against backwardness, the evil that replaced the devil. Conceived with hegemonic vocation, war practices included forms of making live. Inferior humans became the object of benevolent and inevitable inclusion, enemies that did not even count as such. The war was waged through silent means. Yet, when collectives against whom the war is waged demand politics, that is, when the disagreement around equivocations becomes public and collectives press for recognition of that which the state cannot recognize, the silent war may translate into overt battle. Like in the case of the Awahun Wampis, the state waged it in the name of the common good, and the disobedient collectives respond to defend their survival as Awahun territory. Extractivism is a concept that circulates quite profusely in Latin America and that quite literally makes the Anthropocene materially present in the region as a human geological force, while at the same time foregrounding its articulation through financial capital and in connection with infrastructural growth. Currently used in environmental circles in the region, critical contributors to the term trace extractivist practices back to Spanish colonial mining. The extraction of silver from the Cerro Rico de Potosí and Huancavelica, currently Bolivia and Peru, are infamous examples of death and destruction caused by the extraction of minerals for circulation in Iberian metropolitan markets. But many features make extractivism a different venture compared to the earlier, also extractive practices. Some obvious ones are the corporate character of the practice, the worldwide ubiquity of the model and its interconnectedness, the unprecedented rate of expansion of markets for minerals, oil, and energy, and the magnitude of new technologies that allow for their quick and profitable extraction. For example, tunnel mining, that picture over there. The perforation of mountains following the vein of minerals has been replaced by open pits that destroy mountains, creating crater-like formations that extend over hundreds of hectares and reach depths of more than 1,000 meters. And the magnitude of so-called environmental impact is also unprecedented. As an illustration, between the years 2006 and 2011, Bolivia produced 5,600 tons of silver that required the removal of more than 44 million tons of rocks. Removing the rocks from where they were and dumping them also destroys. And while water is not exactly destroyed, replete with contaminants, the mega amounts of water used in mining are rendered useless for the consumption of any living being. These are numbers about concessions of territory granted to mining. And out of these, this is up to 2014, out of these concessions, 51% are in indigenous territories. Moved by a well-funded race for progress and promoted by economic growth, the reach of the current destruction of indigenous worlds is historically unparalleled, and news about it is not precisely scarce. No effort needs to be displayed to learn about appalling incidents at any given time. Consider this commentary, published not long ago, 2016, in Colombia. It narrates the slow death of an indigenous group recognized in Colombia as the Wahoo at the hands of an infamous gold mine. And the slide reads, everything has been taken away from them, they have stolen their land, their water, even their names. And the spoliation continues. The drought that burns them with thirst is neither nature's whim nor a consequence of global warming. It is that great gold company from El Cerrejón it is that the great gold company from El Cerrón built the dam El Cercado, which the state inaugurated with great publicity, and it sucked the water for the needs of the immense mine. The mine grows, and as it does, it evicts the Wahoos into the desert of La Guajira. Prior to the dam, El Cerrejón had already diverted from it for its own ends the course of several streams that fed the Rio Rancheria, and now it insists on building a new riverbed, thus taking the whole river away in order to reach the immense gold deposits that lay under the water. Denunciations like the above find a public beyond the indigenous peoples whose life is at stake, and among those more generally concerned with the distribution of ecological conflicts and human rights. Extractivism has met a relentless opposition that articulates unexpected political alliances across the heterogeneous demands of a vast array of collectives. Politically relevant, they have the capacity to attract public attention against state violations of human rights and corporations' ecological amputations. At the same time, however, performed through modern notions such as the environment, rights, biodiversity, the reality-making practices of the alliances may continue the Anthroponocene and its destruction. Yet, I don't want to dismiss these alliances as easy, because they are complex. And inspecting them with heart and mind open to surprise, we may find that they deserve care. So what I'm saying is the alliances, the prominent speakers of the alliances are environmentalism. And the speech uses modern language. That may continue the Anthroponocene. But slow down and pay attention to the alliances, because yes, it is spoken in modern terms, but that's not all that's going on in those alliances. So I'm trying to open up the alliances to their possibilities. Defending themselves, the spokespersons of worlds experiencing destruction, this time at the hands of extractivism, have revealed their practices through television stations and newspapers. They have suggested that nature or the environment, the matter of public concern, are not only such. Revelations of unimaginable beings and their destruction can be as ubiquitous as the war against those who oppose what the state considers, at least so far, as its mission to provide for the common good. Just as the Anthroponocene, as destruction of recalcitrants to nature and culture, acquired a might and speed that early extirpators of idolatries in the 19th century and 19th century explorers turned into rubber and sugar plantation investors with envy, from the other side of the coin, from the Anthropocene as the rejection of peoples to their destruction, emerge stories that may bring into existence a public that does not yet exist. And that is, of course, Warner's phrase. Thus, even if what becomes public is a translation into environmental and human rights concerns, the denunciations and the alliances that make them possible offer a possibility for ontological openings that deserves attention. Analogous to the Awahun Wampis claim of their being one with their territories and their kinship with the forest, in a dispute about petroleum extraction in a site called Vaca Muerta, in Argentina, a Mapuche group wrote in a communique, "Our territories are not resources but lives that make the Ixofimogen of which we are part, not its owners." Contrastingly, this is how Vaca Muerta is defined by developers from Neuquén, one of the states included in the hydrocarbons deposit at issue. So what they say is Vaca Muerta is a desert that extends beyond what the eyes can see. It's a páramo that we're going to make productive, and that will make Argentina self-sufficient in oil production. The stark contrast suggests that the public dispute is not only about petroleum extraction. The Mapuche Declaration reveals the inherent relationality between the entities that compose the Ixofimogen, which therefore cannot be easily divided into territory and the resources extracted from it. What the oil company enacts as nature in humans, the Bampuche enact not only as such. The interruption of the hegemonic partition is a political worlding event that is also conceptual. It performs an ontological opening emerging from which are humans with what we call nature. This condition, humans with nature, makes of each other more than just one of them, or not only each one of them. Moreover, entities may emerge as materially specific and through the relation that inherently connects them. An example from my work in Cusco may be in order. Runacuna with Tiracuna, and the latter are entities that are also, yet not only mountains, take place together. And when I say take place together, I mean happen together in space and time, take place together. Runacuna and Tiracuna take place together. It's not humans and nature, it's Runacuna, Tiracuna taking place together. In contrast, the relation between modern humans and mountains makes them detached from each other. Runacuna with earth beings are of course not a requirement of the processes that have emerged to question the universal quality of the partition of the sensible into nature and humans. What I'm saying here is we don't need earth beings to question universal nature and the universal separation between nature and humans. Here is another example. In the northern Andes of Peru, a mining corporation has plans to drain several lagoons to extract copper and gold from some of them and to drain mineral waste in other of the lagoons. In exchange, reservoirs would water the capacity several times that of the lagoons would be built. Opposing the plan, environmentalists argue that reservoirs will destroy the ecosystem of which the lagoons are part. A landscape made of agricultural land, high-altitude wetlands, cattle, humans, trees, crops, creeks, and springs. The local population adds that the lagoons are localized, where plants, animals, soils, trees, families are with that specific water, which cannot be translated into water from reservoirs, not even if, as the mining corporation promises, they would provide more water. It would not be the same water, which they defend organized as guardians of the lagoons. People have died in this defense, making public another instance of the war against those who oppose translation of nature into resources. Yet, in no case have the guardians of the lagoon said that the water is a being. It is instead local water, as such also untranslatable into H2O, and therefore not to be used for the general common good. Rather than transpiring through local bodies, water emerges as uncommon nature, and placing being, rocks, soil, plants, cows, and being emplaced by them. An iconic guardian of the lagoon is a peasant woman who plots a corporate mining project wants to buy to fully legalize its access to the territory it plans to excavate. The woman, whose name is Maxima, refuses to sell, and probably for an amount of money that she would otherwise never see in her lifetime. Countless times, the National Police Force, hired by the mine, has destroyed the family's crops, attacked her and her children, even her animals. Hired by the mine, several judiciary courts, or bribed by the mine, several judiciary courts have ruled against the woman. Her plots have been under siege for more than 3 years now. I fight to protect the lagoon has been one of her responses, and a certain attachment to place, she adds, I'm not going to stop, they will disappear me, but I will die with the land. Through the lens of modern politics, and using the grammar that separates humans and nature, this woman can be interpreted as defending the ecosystem, an environmentalist, and thus an enemy or an ally, depending on who speaks. drove to exasperation, supporters of the reservoirs figure her as a cunning manipulator awaiting a better price for her plot. To those on the other side of the political spectrum, she's a hero willing to sacrifice herself to prevent ecological damage. In the language of both detractors and supporters, she's a subject in relation to an object, and thus perfectly grammatical as she acts in response to conditions imposed on her. However, the refusal to sell may include another relation, one from where woman, land, lagoon, or plants, rocks, soils, animals, lagoons, humans, creeks, canals emerge inherently together, an entanglement of entities neither of each other in such a way that pulling any one apart would transform it into something else. Conceived through this relation, the refusal to sell may also imply the refusal of the grammar that transforms entities into individual bodies, units of nature or the environment, which, as part of each other, when they are part of each other, these entities are not. Maxima's refusal would enact a locally ecologized nature, where entities are interdependent on each other, and that simultaneously coincides with, differs from, and exceeds, also because it includes humans, the object that the state, the mining corporation, and the environmentalists translate into resources exploitable or to be defended. Carving out an unusual form of relation, Maxima also makes herself agrammatical to the subject and object relation that the state and capital need to respectively recognize and appropriate. Maximas may be a response that exceeds several expected logics, for example, that of profit and gain, and also that of the environment and its defense. She may model any attributed social position, while at the same time self-asserting composite positions that communicate with usual grammars and also open them up to other possibilities. If she is an environmentalist, and I think she is not only such. Defending herself and also going beyond herself, she declares her stewardship of lagoons and all that their waters allow, and she does so in more than one way. She confronts the mind, arguing her property of the land. She even shows the legal documents that prove her ownership. However, when Maxima explains her being with the land in impossible detachment, their being together through with crops, rain, soil, animals, entities that make either relation, she exceeds the limit of the concept of property, where she nevertheless meets the mind in confrontation. She stays because staying she is. The redundancy reveals the relation both place and Maxima emerge from, one where she is not subject of the land, which is not her object. Her responses, as I asked why she stayed, were, what can I be if I'm not this? And the word place is not uttered. Instead, feet are stumped. This is who I am. How can I go? I still die. The word here is not uttered. Who I am. With my bones I will be. Once again, here is not uttered like I am now. Of course, we can listen to her and hear a habitual subject and object grammar. But the need for the brackets also suggests that there is not only one grammar to her refusal to sell the land the mind wants. Not only is a frequent phrase in our scholarly analysis. I learned to give it conceptual status from my conversations with Mariano Turco, the friend with whom I collaborated the ideas that came into my recent book. A Quechua speaker and a commuter across some of the worlds that make our country, he would insist that what to me was, for example, a mountain was not only land. And grasping what was not only what emerged through my habitual practice of thought, in addition to taking time, required learning to work at a permanent interface where Mariano's worlding practices and mine were both seemingly alike and at the same time different. Drawing from this ethnographic conceptual experience, I propose to think Maxima's refusal to leave, both through the notion of property and its relations and through what may be not only property and the relations that emerge to make her with those she is. Let me explain. Marilyn Strathern says that concepts do their work in an ecology. I think that what she means is that they perform with the concepts they find themselves in the company of. Thus, when Maxima practices her refusal to leave, property may emerge as a concept multiple as she switches from becoming with land to legally defending herself vis-a-vis the corporation's attempt to evict her. The first conceptual practice, becoming with land, exceeds the legal notion of property and emerges beyond its limit. That is, when the legal concept cannot hold it anymore. Refusing to leave may be motivated simultaneously by both an ideological rejection to the mind's desire to destroy lagoons, and it also may be a practice that defines commensuration. It renders land unoccupiable by the market, for it is integrally occupied by and occupying the woman that will not leave. Maxima's story, like those of the Mapuches, the Awahun Wampis, and Andean Runacuna, are stories from the anthroponaut scene. While they seemingly occur everywhere, in Latin America at least, the events are local, and if told attending to place, the narrative may expose complexities that unsettle linear grammars and push concepts to their limits. Listening with care, they reveal that the conflicts they narrate may include a disagreement that would not find resolution, for it exceeds the existing domain of the rule of law, namely the conception and regulation of nature as resources. Considering rather than denying the possibility of excess may open thought and feeling to that which is not only what to our common senses is. The requirement for this opening may be a disposition to give equivocation a chance. This means cultivating a disposition to consider what is hegemonically, for example, nature, to consider that what is hegemonically, nature, for example, may also be other than nature, even if it occupies the same space. Not only a river, also a person, not only universal water, also local water, not only mountains, also earth beings, not only land, also exothimogen. And thus, I will conclude this intervention with a speculation about the possibility of a political alliance that accepts the chance of equivocation. Alliances across not different viewpoints about the same world, but precisely those made considering that viewpoints may correspond to worlds that are not only the same. And there is an empirical case backing my speculation, and I draw it from the Guardians of the Lagoon. Confronted with the mining company's proposal to desiccate the lagoons, a heterogeneous network of environmentalists has backed the local guardians against the mining corporation. The cartoon I include here manifests the alliance. Its author mocks the corporation's efforts to convince a peasant family who, confronted with the choice of finite money and long-lasting land, rationally uses an economic benefit logic and chooses the land. This seemingly mirrors Maxima's decision, yet the cartoon simplifies the alliance. For example, differing with the cartoonist's opinion, the economic security of her family does not figure as definitely in Maxima's refusal to sell. Yet, both cartoonist and Maxima converge in the idea of not selling. Similarly, the interest environmentalists and the guardians of the lagoon share to defend nature or the environment may be not only the same interest. The locally ecologized nature of the guardians and the biologically defined nature of global and national environmental activists may indeed exceed each other. In both cases, however, the possibility exists for a coincidence that rather than identical interests would be underpinned by uncommonalities, interests in common that are not the same interest. Occupying a space that is the same yet cannot be mapped in terms of a single set of three-dimensional coordinates, complexly heterogeneous forms universal nature, the environment, water that resists transformation to H2O, land that is object and not, entities that I'm calling ecologized nature or nature recalcitrant to universality, converge in an alliance that, along with coincidence, may include the parties' constituted divergence. They converge in an alliance without becoming the same. A condition that could alter politics as usual, this alliance would also house hope for commons that does not require the division between universal nature and diversified humans, or commons constantly emerging from the uncommons as grounds for political negotiation of what the interest in common and thus the commons would be. A commons that cannot be without uncommons, instead of the expression of shared relationship and stewardship of nature. These commons would be the expression of a worlding of many worlds ecologically related across their constitutive divergence. So I've used divergence throughout, and I am borrowing this concept from Isabel Stengers, which she uses to talk about the coming together of heterogeneous practices that will remain the same and at the same time self-difference. Think about the lizard and what that is, the orchid and the wasp. Coming together with an interest in common that's not the same interest. The wasp and the orchid, through this interest in common, remain the same, yet they are self-different as well. Extractivism is a trope through which the Anthropocene makes itself present in Latin America, and like at a planetary scale, it threatens to destroy even what makes it possible. Paradoxically, the destructive ruthlessness has made public collectives for whom nature is not only such, and who oppose extractivist destruction of who they are, in noble alliance with environmentalists. Seen through extractivism, the Anthropocene might be a historical moment of implosion, when the war against disobedient worlding practice turns against the worlds that wages it. Defending themselves from the destruction that currently threatens them, the collectives that exceed the divides between human and not human have become visible, manifesting their excess. Against the not seen war, their excess erupts publicly, asserting their being and demanding politics beyond the cultural rights that state might or might not benevolently grant them. A far cry from being a conflict as usual, the disagreement with the state may be about sovereignty, and not only. It may express the public demand to allow in politics conditions of no nature nor culture that have historically been denied existence. The silence that cloaked the war against disobedient worlding practices may be coming to an end. The destruction and the fight against it can be ubiquitously seen on all types of screens. Paradoxically, the era of the Anthropocene may also witness the historical end of the Anthroponocene. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, I mean, there's a whole series of things that emerge. Just a comment, you mentioned the word sovereignty just at the very end.
And at the beginning.
Maybe at the beginning too, I missed it at the beginning because I didn't have the thought which occurred to me in the middle, which is when you were talking about both obeying and disrupting at the same time, the distinction. This both and is the definition of sovereignty. This rather problematic resurrection of Carl Schmitt by Agamben and others. So that just struck me as an interesting kind of, your theoretical move is really a move about kind of conceptual, it's a conceptual move, but its political correlate is a question of sovereignty. So people who have the power both to be within a distinction and to at the same time break it are, in the Schmittian account,
yeah,
sovereign.
But the way they break it is not through is beyond not only the concept of sovereignty, but the limits of the concept of sovereignty. So the way they break it is beyond so yes, You are within and you break sovereignty, within limits of sovereignty.
But the definition of sovereignty that I'm talking about is the capacity to do just that.
I'm not sure, and that is something
Well,
that
that's the definition that's out there. I mean, that's what I come with.
ontologically beyond sovereignty. Ontologically beyond sovereignty, or beyond, because what I'm saying is you break sovereignty when you break, I'm not talking about breaking sovereignty beyond the state sovereignty only. That is something that we can do. I'm talking breaking the possibility of state recognition. Therefore, then you are also beyond sovereignty.
But I think in what you're saying now, you're assuming that sovereignty is something that the state has, and what I'm saying is that what these people are doing is an act of sovereignty, according to that definition of sovereignty. But anyway,
Okay,
this was
if it's an act
preamble
of
to something,
sovereignty according to that definition of sovereignty,
Right.
it's an act of ontological sovereignty, and not only about political sovereignty in the terms of politics of the state.
Yeah.
So this is something that I would like to follow up with you in conversation, because that would be interesting to talk about sovereignty and breaking sovereignty ontologically, which I'm not sure that it is what I'm talking about. When I included the notion of sovereignty here, I was only talking about territory, sovereignty over territory, and the right to decide who, and the right to who decides.
Should I put that between brackets? Because it wasn't really my intention to raise that. I mean, I have a more pointed question, which.
What do you want to put in brackets? Your first question.
No, my first was not a question. It was a comment to set up that you
Okay.
kind of took it before I was finished, so you took it in a different direction. What I wanted to say is that you stage your argument as, and that's how it connects with the question of sovereignty, particularly because it comes from Schmitt, who was a Nazi.
Right.
You stage the discussion as between the modern, which makes the distinction, say, between nature and culture and so on,
Right.
and the indigenous, which both inhabits and breaks that distinction, as you're talking about. And this is a situation of equivocation and also disagreement, and it's a really elegant argument. But many of the things that you talk about in relation to the indigenous side of that relationship are things that remind one very much with the internal, if you like, other of modernity, which is romanticism. So, for example, when one thinks of kind of being together with a mountain, one can think of all those ventures, the kind of Sturm-und-Drang type 19th century Teutonic kind of internal critique of the Enlightenment, right? That correlates, of course, with a kind of primordialism in its romantic version, and an attachment to place, right? Which arguably one could today read onto or
Who's they?
Sorry?
Who's they? They could read on.
No, one could.
Uh-huh.
Arguably, one could recognize in Brexit, in Marine Le Pen, or Trump.
Yeah.
So, for me to become politically consequent, as it were, in this context, one would really need to interrogate the relationship between the indigenous and the romantic, or the proto-fascist, right? Because there is a tendency, I feel, in the way that you frame it, and also in your writing, there is a tendency to somehow, because you're obviously politically committed to the cause, as it were, of the people that you're studying, and you're talking in terms of alliances and things, that there's something kind of ipso facto good about the indigenous and bad about the modern. So, that would be the provocation.
What I really liked most about that presentation was the section where we got to hear how Maxima expressed her relationship with the land, and I just thought it was really telling that she stomped the land and she felt it with her body, and if she's not able to put that into words, she's saying this, I can't remember the words exactly, this is who I am, this. If she can't put that into words and she's performing that with her body, then isn't that a massive task for us? to put this into words and try and explain what it is she feels so passionately about, that she moves her body and touches the ground emphatically. How can we fully grasp that if she can't fully explain it in words? And that's, I just thought that example followed on really well from our discussion this morning, talking about translation and how to put things into words and what words to use.
A sort of follow-on question, because it also has to do with translation and the words that we use, or the words that people use that you've been talking to. Because I'd actually like to know whether you conducted some of these conversations with people in Quechua or in Spanish. We see, regarding where words are coming from, I think it's very important for us to dig in behind the actual text that you gave us on the screen there. For example, this word tiracuna, it comes from the Spanish tierra. It's a hybrid word, and there's a very adequate Quechua word which is pacha for and what is most extraordinary, of course, about pacha is that it evokes both time and place. So it's a much more complex word than what lies behind the average person's understanding of the word tierra. And the other comment that I would have. At one moment you had the words property on the screen. There was also this phrase guardians of the lagoon. So I'm wondering how people talk to you either in Spanish or in Quechua about these ideas. Certainly if we're talking about Quechua, we really don't have a way of talking about the guardian as such. Although I suppose we could argue about that, but it's there's a particular Quechua suffix, the suffix yoch, which I'm sure you must know, which expresses this idea of I am what I am because of my association with that entity, and so that entity and me, as you very well describe, are one and the same to that extent. And then the idea of property again, there's no Quechua word for to have something. You can't say, I have a field. You say, a field exists for my benefit. There's quite a complicated grammatical construction in order to express that association between yourself and your field, but you do not own your field. So I just thought maybe comment on translation and the language, going back to Sarah's question, would be quite interesting.
I'm just wondering that, as Martin claims, that there's this political, even moral charge and kind of the good indigenous and the bad kind of moderns. But I was wondering if there's a way to really make a hygienic notion of ontologies that does not transgress on notions of justice, and like if you could detach the political claims and the claims for justice from the ontologies you were talking about historically, about indigenous peoples being exploited. So what I'm saying is I don't know if there's an hygienic way to depoliticize these terms, for not to mention modernity as being extractivist. So I don't know how you could deal with that problem, because I don't think it's a problem if you're politically engaged and you are talking about these ontologies, such as kind of questions of justice as well, rather than just a question of ontology in itself or going beyond sovereignty. So my question is, could you explain a bit more about justice and ontologies, the relationship there?
About similarities with romanticism, absolutely. But similarities doesn't make it romanticism. So, yes, the danger of similarities, and perhaps a footnote about the dangers of similarities. But again, danger of exoticism, danger of romanticism. I cannot accept that danger will block the possibility of saying maxima with the land. The absence of property in Quechua that Rosalie has just mentioned is perhaps a similarity with romanticism, but it's certainly not romanticism. So I can consider similarities with romanticism or dangers of the similarities with romanticism and write a footnote, but not, romanticism is not going to prevent the analysis that says, I am with the land. And I can say it is not romantic. Certainly, if I'm going to think ethnographically, I'm going to think about the political moment and the emergence of the phrase "I am with the land," in which the moment in which I heard "I am with the land," which is not an abstract moment of "I am with the land." "I am with the land" means I can also be with property. So one doesn't preclude the other. And that is what the not only notion is doing for me. If it were romanticism, I would argue it's not only romanticism, but I'm not even going to say that. I'm just going to say that similarities with romanticism, this is a commentary that has been made to me many, many times, as you can all imagine, right? So that's not going to prevent me from saying Maxima is with the land, and she's making herself agrammatical to the subject-object relation, which, to begin with, I don't think that the Romantics necessarily make themselves such, agrammatical to subject-object. In terms of good about the indigenous and bad about the modern, yeah, maybe I should be more careful with that, but because definitely I know better than making the indigenous good and the modern bad. So I'm also making the environmentalist good, and I could also say that the guardians of the lagoons, to begin with, they don't claim indigeneity, and that to organize the guardians of the lagoon, a lot of bad happened. So the one with the land and ecological nature is the result of politics. And if anything, I would say between the modern and the non-modern, which I refuse to equate with indigenous and non-indigenous, so I think that's a great simplification of what I'm trying to do. Between that, the modern and the non-modern, there is politics. That is not always ontological, but that is also ontological politics. Not only, but also. So I think it has to do, anyway, I'll leave it there. So in terms of translation, Rosalind, these research was all conducted in Spanish because it is Northern Peru. Northern Peru is Spanish speaking. And Maxima, I know more Quechua than Maxima. So it was all in Spanish. And, but yes, property doesn't exist in Quechua. I am with, right? This is for. I am for. Yes, there is no notion of property. And precisely because of that is that I came to think, that from there to there. So thinking what we translate as property into property from Quechua makes us uncomfortable about the notion of property and made me clearly aware, it was an ethnographic moment that made me clearly aware that when the legal documents that I was looking at in my other research, in the research for earth beings, when the legal documents said IU as property of collective was a translation. And that I had to slow down that translation, and I resorted to equivocation, although I was not talking about multinaturalism. Because I was not talking about multinaturalism. Multinaturalism is specific to, I was possibly talking about nature being not only such, but that is not multinaturalism. So, what else? The yuh in Quechua is a beautiful suffix, right? And that again is not, that's blurs the subject object. Yuh, right? you will translate it with subject objects. I am who I am because of my association with that entity. That's the grammar that we use for the translation. But it alters that subject-object translation. So I would say also that this transition, or this change or move from A to A star is also a grammatical move. It is not only conceptual, it not only does something to the concept, but it does to the grammar that the concept belongs to, with which it is. What else? Justice and ontology. That's just a bit, if I can talk just a bit about justice and ontology. I can only talk a bit about that, or else it would need too much. So I don't talk about justice and ontology. I try to think about, and this is not only my work, this is work that I've been doing with Mario Blaser and Arturo Escobar for quite a while. We talk about political ontology. And political ontology is not about justice, it's about politics. And yes, you can say it is a politics for justice, but that's something that I'm not saying, because it's not necessarily a politics for justice, and justice in a liberal sense is not what I would think about if I'm thinking analytically. If I do something else, of course, I am with Maxima for justice, but I don't need to resort to ontology to be with Maxima for justice. I can fight with her and through her legal property titles, as does her lawyer, for example, and they fight for justice. They fight the legal system, not only through the legal system, but the legal system, because the legal system in Cajamarca is occupied by corporate interests that are not even seen as corporate interests, that are seen as legal issues and transpiring through what the law can do and cannot do. So I wouldn't resort to ontology to think about justice. There was something, a way you phrased it, that made me a little bit uncomfortable. Definitely, I think that ontology is not the best word. And one of the things that I really want always to say is, don't say somebody has an ontology. That's not the grammar. If anything, I would like to talk about relations, that relations across practices that world in a different way. Anyway, that's all I can say in a bit.
I guess I have two questions. One is, and thank you very much for it's really a very penetrating and I think provocative analysis of the relationships that are involved in these conflicts you've been describing. In terms of resolving them pragmatically, I don't see where we can go with it. My other question is really unrelated. It's about the subject-object relationship, because I mean, as I've told you, I'm not really comfortable with what seems to be a general trend to try to critique the subject-object relationship. It seems to me, even in the examples you were giving, which of course in English we have examples like of subject-predicate constructions, but say if you say I am Wazir, which you try to translate like I have a house, but doesn't work. But still, I am the subject of the sentence, and Wazir is what in English we might call an object of the preposition. We've still done something to Wasi to express that relationship. So I don't feel as though the subject-object relationship is just gone there.
Could you explain, if it's possible, if there is a difference between welding and different ontologies?
Is there a difference between welding and different ontologies?
Yeah.
Is that what you asked?
Yeah.
Just a kind of clarification, I think you said at one point that this sort of struggle tends to be expressed in quite modern terms, like of rights and justice and environmentalism. And do you think that always in those kind of struggles, sitting underneath it, is this different relationship with the environment, with the land, when you're talking about highland communities that do have quite a strong indigenous heritage, or do you think sometimes that it can simply just be about justice and rights and the kind of language that they're using to talk about it?
Okay. The first question is the most difficult one. The farthest that I've gotten is interests in common that are not the same interest. And I see interests in common that are not the same interest here. And a partial connection here. Maxima's interests are not Veronica's interests. The woman behind Maxima was the candidate to the presidency this last electoral season in Peru. And the guy beside Veronica was the running vice president. I think that between them there's an interest in common that indeed is not the same interest. And what the not same interest is as unclear as what the interest in common is. So, but there is an alliance, and I don't want this alliance to be resolved as an environmentalist alliance, because I think it is not only an environmentalist alliance. So where can we go? Where I go is to not continuing the work that an analytics of the environment and environmental struggles would do. That's where I go. I go to opening up the situation to other ways of thinking. That's where I go. I am extremely aware that this, not necessarily talking about interests in common that are not the same interests, and that's maybe one of the reasons why I've resorted to that language, because that is not a disempowering language. I know for experience that the idea of defending Ausangate as an earth being vis-a-vis the president of the region is a disempowering strategy that was retrieved from the discussion as we were coming down from Pachanda to the Plaza de Armas del Cusco, planning how to present the conversation to the president of the region. That retrieval from the discussion of that possibility of defending Osangate as an earth being was another ethnographic moment that opened up to me the possibility of thinking about the ontology of politics and what politics allows and does not allow in its sphere. So it was a moment in which I thought, thinking about that moment made me think about it is a discussion about what Osangate is. But how far do we go with that in terms of the official state, in terms of the state? Or the gold mining company? Not far. Definitely not far. But do we, because we cannot go far, don't challenge our thought? So that is a conundrum. And I think it's an important conundrum to dwell in. Donna Haraway has recently published Staying with the Trouble. And I totally feel that condition. It's not a metaphor, it is a condition to live the trouble, to live the anxiety, to don't think, oh, that's too dangerous, therefore, or too disempowering, therefore, I'm not going to think like that. Of course, I think about how to translate so that it is not disempowering, but not do it. Not doing it is not something I would do. Yes, okay. Subject, object. Yes, okay. So wasiyah, the yoh does something to wasi, but it also does something to yoha. So that's where I think worth thinking through. It's not the same. The grammar is, we know that the grammar is not the same. So let's think about how, not me, because I'm not the Quechua specialist, but others. Always, no, not always, of course. Not always, of course, and not everybody. I mean, like what I said, interests in common that are not the same interest. And maybe you don't need this kind of being with the land for the interest in common not to be the same interest, to be not the same interest. So this phrase, you can take it wherever you want. And that's why I like it. I borrowed it from Isabel Stenger's, she used it first for the Seattle events where people, and she uses it for France or for the European market, farmers and GMOs. So interesting comments that are not necessarily the same. You don't need ontological difference to talk about that. And that brings me to your question, Antonio. I don't know if I talk about different ontologies. I don't say that phrase, different ontologies. I say different worldview practices. I say ontological politics. I don't say different ontologies because it takes me to the billiard balls. Because as I said before, I don't think that ontologies, it is very unlike culture. It's not something that, well, we've thought I want to think through ontology in a way that is very different from the way in which I thought about culture, which is, culture is something that people have. I don't want to think about ontologies as something entities have. I want to think about entities being, and if we have to call that ontology because that's the word at hand, then I would use it. And that's why I prefer worlding practices that make worlds. Although I would be willing to say worlding practices rather than practices that make worlds to, again, avoid billiard balls or geographical assignation that would go with different ontologies. But as I think I said, perhaps not out loud before, I think that worldings do not necessarily need to be thought through geography. That's something that we might want to rethink as well.